Absinthe is the stuff of writers, poets, artists, and madmen, all of whom are arguably the same thing. There are few drinks that have the mystery, allure, and controversy of absinthe, simultaneously touted as the hallmark of high society and the downfall of the same. Absinthe has had an unparalleled reputation. If absinthe is associated with anything, it's the questionable allure of its supposed hallucinogenic properties, its appeal to a certain bohemian crowd, and its potential for addiction and destruction. That's the story that's gone along with the drink for decades, and it all got us real momentum with some incredibly unfortunate events in a very unlikely place. Comigny is a rural town in Switzerland. It's a fascinating little town with a history that dates back to Julius Caesar and the Roman occupation. It has historic homes and villas, and it's also known as the site of a terrible, terrible murder that helped cement the hatred and suspicion of absinthe. In 1905, absinthe was riding a wave of popularity among the masses in spite of a lot of hype that was already in full swing. The continued popularity was in part because of its properties, but also because of its affordable price, until a peasant named Jean Lamfray drank a little too much, not only of absinthe, but of his usual daily allotment of wine and at least 3 other types of alcohol. He returned home after his binge, got into an argument with his pregnant wife, and killed her along with their 2 children. He then shot himself in the head, and when police made it to the scene, they found that he had not only survived, but was still conscious. That day, August 28th, was a turning point in the world's view of alcohol in general, and absinthe in particular. It had long been suspected that there was something dangerous about the green liquid, and with the help of journalists who started calling the crime the Absinthe Murders, absinthe was completely condemned. It was banned in Switzerland in 1910, and the United States and France soon followed suit. Well before the Lamfray murders, absinthe was already something of the drink of bohemian rebels, and when artists Manet and Degas featured absinthe in their works, the reaction was nothing less than outrage. L'Absinthe is one of Degas' most popular paintings. Even if you're not an art history major, you probably know which one it is. It shows a woman staring vacantly over her glass of absinthe, a look of overwhelming depression written clearly on her face. When the painting debuted, it was called Repulsive, a portrait of degraded souls capable only of vice. The Westminster Gazette went as far as to publish a review saying, "Fine painting it may be, but fine art is a very different thing." Manet got a similar reaction to his The Absinthe Drinker. His first major work, he used an alcoholic rag picker as his model for a piece that didn't exactly cause the major social splash he'd been hoping for. When he submitted the piece to the French Salon, it was wholeheartedly rejected, and he was faced with the same criticisms that his friends and mentor had given him. He was derided for his choice of subject matter, so much so that when his mentor, Thomas Couture, viewed it, his comments weren't about the technique or the quality of the piece, but to express his absolute horror that Manet seemed to have lost his moral faculty, to use a subject like the Parisian absinthe drinker. The presence of absinthe themes, whether just the depiction of bottles or the actual drinkers, had a bizarre snowball effect that made people look at what was acceptable for fine art and what wasn't, no matter how well the painting itself was done. If there's any place in America that seems a fitting home to absinthe, it's New Orleans. Throughout the 1800s, the old Absinthe House was the place to go. famous for their absinthe and sugar water cocktail called the Absinthe Frappé, or the Green Monster. And it's the reason the British lost the Battle of New Orleans. On January 8, 1815, British troops marched on the city. They were ultimately thwarted by an unlikely pair, General and future President Andrew Jackson and the privateer Jean Lafitte. The legend goes that the talks which ultimately cemented the partnership and led to the American victory were held in a secret meeting room in the old Absinthe House. Lafitte, sometimes called a privateer and sometimes called a pirate, had the ships but no men, while Jackson had men but few ships. In exchange for a full pardon for Lafitte and all his men, the pirate agreed to let the general man his ships with soldiers. It wasn't long before the British troops fell. Because everything that involves absinthe has to come with some kind of controversy, in 1951, the nearby Maspero's Exchange filed a lawsuit against the old Absinthe House. They claimed that they were, in fact, the actual meeting place for the exchange, and if anyone was going to be putting up a plaque, it was going to be them. The district judge dismissed the case with an epic ruling. He stated, "Legend means nothing more than hearsay or a story handed down from the past." The number of claims made against absinthe constitute a long list, and a lot of those came from the work of French psychiatrist Valentin Magnan. He was the one who gave the claims scientific credibility, and suddenly the pitfalls of absinthe were very, very real. In the 1860s, Magnan was already in a highly respected position. He was the physician-in-chief of St. Anne, one of France's most well-known insane asylums. Magnan ended up being one of the groundbreaking pioneers in the field of mental pathology. Only 32 years old when he took up residence at St. Anne, he was among the leaders in practical laboratory work, not only when it came to absinthe but in other addictive substances, like cocaine as well, often using animals to test the effects of various substances and drugs. Even greater than his interest in addictive drugs was his interest in epilepsy. Magnan was key in developing theories on the degradation of nerves and nervous tissues, along with theories on how hereditary and environmental factors act on an individual. He also spoke out in opposition of some of the theories of criminology put forth by César Lombroso. Magnan wasn't as kind to the idea of alcoholism and absinthe, though. He based his work on the numbers of alcoholics admitted to the insane asylum at St. Anne, determining that the number of cases had been on the rise. He also found that there was an increased likelihood of alcoholics to have another in their family. On top of all that, he also pronounced another diagnosis: the steady decline of French culture. He blamed this largely on what he saw around him: alcoholics and the increasing popularity of absinthe. There were more alcoholics, more people diagnosed as insane, and a greater strain on the population at large. He claimed that this was all due, in no small part, to absinthe, and he set out to prove it. In 1869, he published the damning results of an experiment in which he exposed different animals to a solution of either alcohol or wormwood oil. The animals who received the alcohol got drunk, while those who got the straight wormwood oil developed seizures. Clearly, absinthe was to blame, he concluded. Despite its obvious flaws, the work of Magnan led to absinthism being declared a completely different mental illness than alcoholism. Magnan described absinthism as being characterized by restlessness, confusion, seizures, delirium, and the presence of auditory and visual hallucinations, meaning that the person had consumed so much absinthe that it had resulted in a complete altering of their natural mental state. He also said that the sufferer of absinthism was more prone to irrational, uncontrolled violence and rage, fits of anger, and terrifying episodes of delirium, something that Lamprey would seem to confirm years later. He wasn't the only one to denounce absinthe either. The definition of the supposed illness was also published in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal, the forerunner to the New England Journal of Medicine. Between 1867 and 1912, over 16,000 patients were admitted to the asylum, and about 1% of those were diagnosed with absinthism. As if absinthe didn't have enough going against it, there was also the incredibly ancient and extraordinarily dark history and lore of wormwood, working against the drink when it came to popularity. Wormwood had been used for medicinal purposes as far back as ancient Egypt, and there are even mentions of it in ancient papyrus documents. A 1552 BC copy of what's believed to be an even earlier document dating back to somewhere around 3500 BC talks about wormwood in the context that it gives it its name, a treatment for intestinal worms. In ancient Greece, wormwood was supposed to be used to help ease labor pains, but the connection between absinthe and wormwood is an odd one. The word absinthe is most likely derived from the Greek word absinthion, which means undrinkable, and that in turn is a biblical reference. Wormwood is also a star discussed in Revelations. When the end of the world comes, 7 trumpets will sound and bring 7 horrors onto the world. At the third, wormwood will crash into the earth and turn a third of the world's water supplies bitter, poisonous, and undrinkable. Thank you for watching my video. Please like and subscribe, and have a wonderful evening.